Sometimes I sit here and wonder why I even bother trying to write an introduction when like 98% of YouTube videos start with, "Hi, welcome to the YouTube video." And I don't even blame them, we're not going for Pulitzers here, and intros suck. Instead, I'll do something that's much easier for me to do, which is shill for myself in the name of sustenance. If you enjoy this video, or even if you hate it but like my other videos, consider checking out patreon.com/regularpat. At any tier, you get access to a bunch of additional videos, including a weekly Q&A series I do with the patrons where I talk about basically anything, oftentimes featuring a bunch of Kingdom Hearts talk. If we're looking at regular Pat's best moment, it's probably launching the Patreon, because I couldn't do what I do without the patrons. We actually just recently passed 3 years of the Patreon, and I've had so much fun getting to interact with the patrons, and also having money for food is a nice bonus. I just wanted to say thank you to the people who have been with me for the long haul here. Your support means the world to me. And I'm sure it would mean the world to all of you if I would just get on with the video already, so let's do that. So, when I say every KH character's best moment, what do I mean by best? In fact, what do I mean by moment? And also every KH character? Maybe it's a bad title. Well, as much as I'd love to stop down and talk about the biggest highlights for the Enchanted Brooms or Puppy number 12, I think it's in all our best interest to limit the discussion to major characters. Plus, I did just show you footage of both of those characters' best moments, so check those off the list. Even major characters is something I ran into trouble with, because we could use the term main characters or important characters, but no matter which way you phrase it, there's going to be some question marks and fringe cases, and we'll get to those. But the purpose of this exercise today is to take a look at each quote-unquote major character in the franchise and force myself to pick what I think is their definitive moment across the entire series, scenes that get to the core essence of each character. If I'm trying to explain Kingdom Hearts to aliens, because that's where my priorities lie, what scene do I show of each character, I assume frantically from an operating table, to give the aliens the best picture of what these characters are all about? And we're saying scene or moment because I want to keep things limited to one uninterrupted event. We can't just say Riku's arc, that would be cheating. And when I say best, I don't necessarily mean favorite. I usually deal with favorites on this channel, but I'm going to try and be a bit more universal with my picks, so to speak. The word best is a bit objective truth-coded, but make no mistake, this is all still very much a subjective and opinionated exercise. But while I might consider my favorite Sora scene one where he does or says something funny, for our purposes here, I wouldn't put that in the conversation for the best Sora scene, or more accurately but less succinctly, the most representative, definitive, this is what Sora is all about scene. While not the main factor in deciding my picks, I do think the scene should ideally be something that comes to mind relatively quickly when you think of a given character, but there will be exceptions. That all being said, I invite you to disagree or propose alternatives in the comments, because believe me, some characters had an embarrassment of riches, and others had embarrassingly few options. And some characters had such an obvious choice, it was the first thing that popped into my head when I decided on this project. For Sora, it's My Friends Are My Power from KH1. And in fairness, there are other moments that might enter the discussion, but this scene in Hollow Bastion is the closest thing we get to a mission statement for the series and its main character. Part of me feels like it's a bit weird to pick a moment that happens relatively early on in Sora's journey, but it's a moment that's referenced over and over again in future games, most obviously in Recoded and Dream Drop. The cutscenes are even named the exact same thing, albeit with an exclamation mark in Dream Drop's case. If you wanted to swap out the KH1 scene for the DDD version, I wouldn't really have any qualms. I did consider both Sora using the Keyblade of Heart later on in Hollow Bastion, as well as his decision to use the Power of Waking to save Kairi at the end of KH3. Those are both moments of self-sacrifice from Sora, which is definitely a core part of his character. He's a really selfless guy, but I don't know if it's the defining characteristic for Sora. It's not something that's necessarily unique to him in the games. You have Aqua sacrificing herself and ending up in the Realm of Darkness, or Xion making the impossible choice to return to Sora at the end of Days. When I think of Sora, I first think of his ability to make connections, to serve as some sort of heart nexus for everyone he encounters. And that first My Friends Are My Power scene, or the MFAMP scene if you're cool, is that quality boiled down into 2 minutes and 57 seconds. I just love the idea of Sora not being a chosen one or some kind of fated hero, but instead just a guy. A guy who was in the right place at the right time, who just so happens to have the helpful trait of being able to easily make friends. They always say the best leaders are the ones who don't want to lead, and that seems to be the case here, because Sora basically negs the Keyblade back into his ownership. Like, this kid said, "I don't need the mysterious weapon tied to the Realm of Light. I have a LinkedIn profile." And the mysterious weapon said, "He's making a ton of sense." All this to say, I really hope Sora's role in the series isn't mucked up by some sort of Child of Destiny prophecy. If anything, if he truly must be some sort of foretold, destined hero hailing from the Destiny Islands, I hope his destiny is loosely defined. Like, the universe gifted him the power of connections and said, "Go nuts," and there's nothing more to it than that. But as of this video, that remains to be seen.
I don't need a weapon. My friends are my power.
Naturally, next we'll consider a close friend of Sora's, always by his side, wise beyond his years, the blue to Sora's red. Let's talk about Donald moments. Yeah, just Donald, no ampersand, no tall dog. Kinda weird, right? There aren't really a ton of moments that focus on Donald dramatically more than Goofy. There are scenes where one might get more lines than the other, but they're often working in tandem, as to be expected. I have a feeling that you may have already thought of one standout scene, and that it might rhyme with Beta Hair or Cheddar Bear. Is this a particularly strong character scene for Donald? To quote the duck himself, not really, but it's undoubtedly the first Donald-centric moment that came to mind. The second would be his initial appearance strutting through the colonnade of Disney Castle, but that's probably both less characterizing and less exciting. Funnily enough, I snubbed the sacrificial Sora moments and picked a strangely sacrificial Donald moment, unless he's just taking a little nap here. Even still, actions might speak louder than 1,000 quacks, because I still think the Zetaflare moment does a decent job illustrating what Donald is in Kingdom Hearts. A stupidly powerful and experienced mage who is willing to put it all on the line to protect his friends, even if he's a stubborn and ill-tempered dickhead at times. It doesn't have to get much deeper than that for Donald Duck, nor is that something I'm really looking for. And then we have Goofy, who even cut in on Donald's big moment by knocking Xehanort off balance. A shield bump, despite being well-timed and appreciated, isn't quite at the same caliber as Donald's Final Fantasy record-breaking death lasers, so that's out. Honestly, and don't laugh, but my mind most quickly centers on when he dies? Not so much the scene where the Rock commits Old Yeller, more so the scene where he rejoins the party A-OK. It's short and not a ton is said, but I mean, it sure is Goofy. Like, these three thought Goofy had died, and then he comes back and is like, have you guys not seen literally any of my work? He is the king of concussions. And Donald punishes Goofy for his near-death experience by assaulting him. Still, I think this moment does a good job highlighting how Goofy serves as comic relief and how much he means to his friends. Sora and Donald were right to be sad because they'd have to soldier on for the rest of the series with only a handful of brain cells between the two of them. Goofy adds at least a couple dozen more, and he functions as, ironically, the trio's rock. I did also consider the moment where Goofy defects from Riku by teleporting across the entrance hall. It's more powerful, but Donald still follows soon after. Goofy was just a bit quicker. I do have to imagine that Sora privately prefers Goofy over Donald, if only because of that moment. Kind of like a Dorothy and the Scarecrow situation.
Hey, fellas!
Of course, the strongest Donald and Goofy stuff is when they're presented as an equal duo, so I wanted to throw in a sort of honorable mention for D&G as a unit. It might be slight recency bias, though this game is now old enough to attend kindergarten, but I'm going with this moment right before the trio enters Skalad Kylum. Sora thinks he's off to solo the big bad all by himself, and Donald and Goofy politely remind him that their contracts ensure they'll be getting a bit more screen time. Goofy even lampshades how Keybladeless Disney characters aren't typically the most threatening presence, especially under these circumstances, but they still roll with it anyway. I also just love how it's presented cinematically, how it focuses on Sora walking alone and then the two join in alongside him. My one regret is that they go back to the shoehorned KH3 half-pint thing here instead of the more natural and longer-standing all-for-one, one-for-all.
You can't forget about us!
Just to stay on the Disney train here, let's cover Mickey next. What is the best Mickey moment? Well, his agent only booked him a cameo role in the first game, and while it's certainly iconic, it wasn't even the first scene that came to mind. For the more meme-inclined, you might recall something like, say fellas, did somebody mention the door to darkness, or perhaps they'll pay for this. But I remember something else. I remember when Mickey, half his face badly burned, suffering from accelerated aging ever since the events at Shadow Moses, literally dragged himself through the microwave hallway so he could help Chip and Dale upload the Key Alive virus and stop Xehanort from using the Foreteller's AI to rule the world. Oh, sorry, I mean when he fought the replicas in Remind or whatever. This is going to be the only gameplay moment on the list, but, you know, gameplay in quotes. The whole thing is not only the type of spectacle you'd expect from the Disney mascot, but it's quintessential Mickey. It's dripping with this almost saccharine level of optimism and perseverance. Like the only reason Sora's HP bar ever runs out is because he's not believing in himself hard enough. The mouse is 91 years old here. He's fully prepared to kill everyone on the planet who's ever had pointy ears and yellow eyes, and he is literally too positive to die. Not only is the scene indicative of Mickey's hopeful nature, but it is fully representative of the mouse's vice grip on culture. He's not going anywhere, even if blasted directly in the chest by a big pink laser beam. Or if the Steamboat Willie copyright expires.
No, I can't give up!
Alright, let's shift gears and figure out Riku's best moment. Off the bat, I think all of KH1 is off the table because Riku is playing the anti-hero to straight-up villain role in this game, and I don't think anything here best represents him. The first moment that I think of is actually him standing up to the Demon Tide when it's only him and Sora left in the Keyblade graveyard. It's emblematic of his strength and courage, but Riku in KH3 is frankly not doing a whole lot, so I don't know if that's the game I want to pull from. I kind of view 3 as a well-deserved break for Riku since he's finally and fully overcome his demons and he doesn't have as much of a personal journey to go on as usual. His arc for the first phase of the series pretty much wrapped up in Dream Drop, and after some consideration, I think that's what I want to pull from. DDD is the closest thing we have to a Riku-centric game after all, and he's all over the late game where he gets a lot of the spotlight. I think this scene here with Ansem the Wise at the end of DDD is a beautiful cap-off to his redemption arc and a fantastic callback to the early days of said arc. And granted, Riku spent all of days and part of KH2 working on bailing Sora out of a jam, but he has to do so yet again when Xehanort nearly makes Sora his vessel in the finale of Dream Drop. After diving into Sora's dream and defeating the armored Ventus Nightmare, Riku meets a data version of his old colleague, Ansem the Damn Fool. Apparently, Ansem made Sora eat a bottle while he was sleeping, and this bottle contains tasty data that can help our heroes recover the hearts of Roxas, Xion, and Ven. This is a pretty huge development for the overarching plot, and it's another reason why I landed on this moment, because a key part of Riku's character in my eyes is being clutch as fuck and doing like 80% of the shit that needs to get done. The man puts in work and he gets results. But after chatting with Ansem, Riku prepares to return to the real world, and Ansem asks him his name, a callback to Diz asking him the same question during the prologue of KH2. Back then, Riku had recently tapped into his inner darkness to defeat Roxas and was ashamed to use his real name, instead opting to go by Ansem. After a long and winding road to dawn and a few darkness management classes, the Riku we see here is finally at peace with himself and his past, and this time answers with confidence,
"It's Riku."
It's just a great full circle moment and one that feels really deserved. Some other contenders here include the scene where Riku passes the Mark of Mastery right after, but I don't put a ton of stock into the whole master thing. I think the Keyblade education system is kind of a load of bunk. I also consider the ending of KH2 with Riku and Sora on the dark margin. The focus there is more so on specifically Sora and Riku's friendship, so I ultimately preferred this DDD scene for being more Riku-centric. But that beach chat would definitely be my pick if we were looking for their best scene as a duo.
Yeah. What'll I do with him?
And then we have the curious case of Kairi. I don't think I'm taking a huge leap to say that a large chunk of Kairi's history is seeped in being a Sora satellite. That's not all she is, but a ton of her bigger scenes deal with the significance she has to Sora as his light in the darkness. But we do see glimmers of other threads for Kairi's character throughout the games. Most recently, we see her contending with Xehanort's role in meddling with her destiny during the finale of Melody of Memory. I can't possibly pick that scene though, because Xehanort sorta gives her the business in this fight. It would be like picking the Xemnus wrist grab in KH3. My naive and optimistic side wants to say that Kairi's best and biggest moment hasn't happened yet. You know the song Dare by Gorillaz? That's how I feel about Kairi's time to shine. It's coming up. It's coming up. Just like Dare, I've been singing that since 2005. But surely one of these days it's gonna happen, right? This is not to suggest that Kairi has never had good moments in the past 22 years, just that so many are tied to her relationship with Sora. Because what's the first big Kairi moment you think of? For me, it was The Promise, the scene where she gives Sora her lucky charm in the Traverse Town waterway. But it just feels like more of a Sora scene that Kairi happens to be in. Then again, maybe it is representative of Kairi across the series. She wants to come along with Sora and help, and she gets shot down. And what happens 18 years later in Melody of Memory? She, shoots herself down? So I guess that's character development? I also thought of when Kairi saves Sora from being a Heartless in KH1, or when they fly back to the Keyblade Graveyard after the Demon Tide killed everyone in KH3. That second moment is pretty much a callback to the first, but they're both about Kairi's role in relation to Sora, 2 times where she has a role in bringing Sora back. Is that her thing? It's definitely a huge part of her presence in the series, but I think there's still something more there. After some consideration and talking with friends, I found myself looking at KH1 again, and I landed on the scene with her and Sora sitting on the dock. Not only do we get to see Kairi crack a joke here about ghosting Riku, but we actually get some insight on her hopes and desires beyond being Sora's walking, talking anchor of light. Although her past wasn't fully fleshed out in KH1, we already know by this scene that Kairi hasn't always lived on Destiny Islands, and by this point in the series, we know that her getting there was a bit of a tumultuous affair. She was ripped from her home and presumably her only relative and sent to a different planet. She's been on the island for 10 or so years at this point, and while she shares Sora and Riku's desire to go explore the world, she wants to ensure that she can still come back to this place that's safe to her, a place she now calls home. She still wants that stability in her life, which is something that Sora also represents. He's unchanging to her, or at least that's what she needs him to be. Riku is changing, but Sora is steady. When she's writing her letter in the secret forest way later in KH3, she references how she hopes Sora will remain the happy and cheerful person she knows. We're always going to run into the problem of most major Kairi moments tying back into her relationship with Sora, but in this case, I feel like we get to see more of what Sora means to Kairi instead of the other way around. But I won't really quibble with anyone picking a different scene that I mentioned, or something else like her charging into battle in KH2. This was definitely the toughest one to decide on so far.
I just can't wait. Once we set sail, it'll be great.
Sticking with KH1 debuts, let's take a look at our first major villain, Ansem, Seeker of Darkness. If you've watched an older video of mine where I rank my top 10 scenes in the series, you might recall that Ansem's death scene in KH3 is one of my all-time personal favorites. With that in mind, and to harken back to this video's intro, I don't know if that's Ansem's absolute best work. The death scene is so special to me because it feels like a conversation that Ansem is having with Riku, but also that the game is having with me about the journey I embarked on alongside the series 17 years prior. When KH3 released, I was at this emotionally vulnerable crossroads in my life, like 4 months away from graduating college, and hearing Ansem tell me there was more to seek and then encouraging me to do so was like getting a pep talk from your favorite uncle. He's an uncle who's done federal time for armed robbery, but he's still family.
There is more to seek. So go forth now and seek it.
The scene really resonated with me, but I feel like I, as the player, am hogging too much spotlight to name it the best Ansem SOD scene. I think the best scene for the first main antagonist has to come from the first game, and really it's between two of his big speeches. There's one who knows nothing can understand nothing in the beginning of the game, and take a look at this tiny place at the end. Brown robe versus exposed chest. There's a case to be made for both, and I know that initial speech in the secret place certainly left more of an impression on my child self, despite the fact that I couldn't actually see Ansem's body in my CRT from the 90s. But the homecoming speech is basically just a highlight reel of the first speech with additional content and improved visibility, so I think I gotta go with that. Ansem's musing about Riku's desire to leave the island gains additional importance in hindsight when we learn how it also applies to Xehanort. And everything else he says really just gets to the core of what Ansem is all about. He's a little darkness-obsessed freak who's fully willing to possess as many teenagers as necessary in his pursuit of knowledge. Darkness is the alpha and omega, and Ansem is somewhere in between, trying to get a hold of the big heart locked behind a door so he can download all of Wikipedia. I also just have to give it some extra points for Billy Zane's truly mesmerizing performance here, and that's no shade to Richard Epcar because only one Ansem voice actor has ever wished me a happy birthday.
So you have come this far, and still you understand nothing.
So, does Jiminy count as a main character? I mean, he's a supporting character at least, right? But how does this guy travel with the main trio for 4 whole games and we're still asking this question, or calling them the main trio? I guess because he usually gets really camera shy after his first few scenes. He actually gets more screen time in games like Recoded and Dream Drop, where he's either relegated to Disney Castle or Prankster's Paradise, respectively. But he's traveling in Sora's hood for the entirety of KH2, and he gets one voiced scene, 4 lines, and then he goes back to sleep. But the bug is on the cover of at least 2 games, so I'm going to give him major character treatment here. His biggest game has got to be Chain of Memories, where the party really feels more like SDGJ than just SDG. But he spends the bulk of the game taking equal part in most of the conversations, losing his journal entries, and being overall wrong about the nature of Castle Oblivion. So I don't think his big moment comes from the climb up the castle. But maybe there's a case to be made for when the party reaches the top. When you think of Jiminy in the Kingdom Hearts context, you probably think of his role as a chronicler. He's still on conscience duty, but mainly in relation to Pinocchio, with a handful of moments where Sora is a less wooden stand-in. So even though it's only 1 line, Jiminy's idea to write down Thank Naminé in the journal is going to be my pick. It has lasting effects that extend even into KH3, and it boils down Jiminy's whole shtick decently well. I did consider his opening monologue and Recoded, but it's mostly just a recap and, you know, Recoded.
And it will say Thank Naminé.
But speaking of Naminé, unlike the series is, let's move on to her highlights. Not her fashion highlights, obviously. She's been wearing this same dingy white dress for literally 20 years. Sorry, I don't know why this one started out like a roast. Unlike a lot of our heroes, I don't think any of Naminé's potential best moments come from KH3 because we're struggling to get any moments at all from her in that game. But despite her benchwarming status for the last decade or so of the series, she does have pretty substantial appearances in KH2, Days, and especially Chain of Memories. She has pivotal scenes in each of them. It was sort of tradition for 3 games in a row that one of the main characters would have to sit down with Naminé and have a long, uncomfortable discussion. Her bedside manner is inconsistent at best, but someone's gotta have the tough conversations with all these different versions of Sora. Not unlike her somebody, a lot of Naminé content has to do explicitly with Sora. After all, like 90% of her powers have to do with influencing Sora's memories and others' memories of him. While she has some gut-wrenching conversations with Roxas and Xion, I tend to drift back towards the late game of Chain of Memories for the Naminé selection. I'm going with the last scene in Sora's campaign, which is the same scene as my Jiminy pick. For the majority of her short life, Naminé has lived as a prisoner, forced to manipulate the person who most cares for her, who only cares for her because she tricked him into doing so. In short, it's totally fucked. But as STG and J make their way to the top of the castle, murdering her captors along the way, Naminé is able to return the favor and be Sora's protector, watching over him as he sleeps and regains the memories she was muddling with. Earlier on in the game, the reality of Naminé being Kairi's shadow was held over her head as an insult, something undesirable. Naminé wouldn't achieve complete autonomy for about a decade and a half, but for the time being, she was able to use her existential connection to Kairi to bring comfort and clarity to Sora as he enters the pod. The promise Sora makes here with Naminé echoes the one he made with Kairi in the Secret Waterway, but it's more than just that. It's emblematic of an idea that the series carries forward for years and years to come. That when people are physically absent, or even if memory of them is lost or obscured, the connections that have been forged will still remain. The brain might forget, but the heart is engraved. With this promise, the titular chains of memories shift from being less so oppressive chains that bind and restrict, but links that connect. It's a beautiful moment, and Naminé is at the center of it. If we were picking manga moments, I'd go with the part where she gets fucking crucified.
A promise. Huh.
With that, let's shift over to someone who's a bit more of a messiah figure in Xemnus. He spends his first major appearance posing as a staunch advocate for nobody rights, but little do his followers know he's a false prophet. Like his heartless counterpart, much of Xemnus' character is rooted in how convinced he is that he fully understands the world's natural order. Ironically, he understands nothing. Xemnus sees his detachment from emotions, or even the memory of emotions, as the reason why he's able to truly comprehend how the heart works. But as an outsider looking in, Xemnus thinks the prevailing emotions are, as he lays out in his battle quote, anger and hate. When looking for that key Xemnus moment, the most immediate ideas that come to mind are his speeches at the Altar of Naught in Cage 2 or his death scene in Cage 3. It's tough to avoid considering a ton of these Cage 3 death scenes for the record, since it's only fitting that a character's send-off, permanent or not, sorta gets to the core of their, well, character. Xemnus is no exception because we see so much come full circle in this moment. The major components to Xemnus' character include his aforementioned misguided view of the heart, his manipulative nature, and his status as an authority figure. In his final moments, we touch on all of these things. Sora asserts that he knows Xemnus has a heart, calling back to the big lie that Xemnus propagated to manipulate his peons to do his bidding, a lie that drove so much of the plots of both Cage 2 and Days. Not only is that dishonesty flipped on its head here with how candidly Xemnus speaks, but he admits that he did genuinely feel some form of kinship with his fellow organization members. He treated them like tools, but along the way he forged some sort of camaraderie with them. Now they're all gone or actively working against him, and all that's left is loneliness. Xemnus had always seemingly relished in his non-existence, as a being of nothingness. There was some kind of dignity to it for him, unmarred by both light and darkness, something that stretched on for eternity. Here he says,
"And now I have nothing."
A declarative statement of regret. Nothingness isn't just freedom from pain, it's also the absence of the positive things that a heart lets one experience. Still, he mistakenly claims that a heart is only pain, which Sora rebuts. Pain isn't all there is to humanity, but it is part of the deal. And with his last breath, Xemnus gives a tip of the cap to one of his many pawns, a simultaneous show of respect and an admittance of his own weakness. He sheds his title of superior and effectively passes the crown to Sora, essentially saying that anyone who's managing to do this whole human thing is much stronger than he. I should note, the last time that Sora, Riku, and Mickey stood in front of Xemnus, he asked them why they hate the darkness. This time, Sora is the one asking the questions, asking Xemnus if everything he had done was worth it. I don't know if that's an intentional callback, but it's some cool symmetry. And that just adds to what I think is overall another beautiful, encapsulating moment.
It must take incredible strength.
Let's just go down the line and cover the next member of the original organization, Xigbar. Unlike the first two villains we've discussed, the book is still fairly unwritten when it comes to the free shooter, and that book is the Book of Prophecy, since we know from the Cage 3 epilogue that this guy is really Lushu, and it's hard not to immediately turn your attention there when considering the defining Xigbar scene. From his first appearance, Xigbar's whole shtick has basically been that it's super unclear what exactly he's up to, so it's only natural that the pick here is the moment where the pieces finally fall into place. Xigbar started out as an intriguing character who clearly knew more than he was letting on. Even back in 2005, his hint about the quote-unquote others after his boss fight made it evident that he was a bigger player than a bunch of the other members you killed. His status as the organization's number 2 still seemed random and even unearned. Of course, Birth by Sleep showed us that he was basically a nepo baby who got the job because he knew the owner. But then the Cage 3 epilogue showed that he's got quite a history with being the second in command. It's revealed that the smoking surfer was puppeteering the puppet master this whole time, and given that this is all on the orders of someone even higher up, Pinocchio would shudder to know how long these strings stretch. I am not someone who would propose that Nomura and the writers knew from the beginning the exact role that Xigbar would play. I think the initial foundation being set in Cage 2 was preparing for his ties to Xehanort in BBS. But the Lost Master scene allows us to go back and trace Xigbar's involvement throughout the series, which is pretty cool. It usually holds up, but sometimes there are a few questionable choices, like Brig getting shot in the face because he's just really committed to the bit. Even with this reveal, Xigbar/Luxu and his past are still shrouded in mystery, and I would wager that his true best moment has yet to occur. Prior to Cage 3, I probably would have gone with the added scene in 2FM where he talks to Zexion about the two chambers, another instance where the hidden depths of Xigbar's knowledge is put on full display.
I hope you like long stories.
And yes, we're actually going to be looking for the best Xaldin scene. In this case, there's really only two games to choose from, his debut in Cage 2 and his primarily text-based appearance in Days. I mean, I guess we could pull from some Dylan moments, including roles such as Man on Floor or Constipated Man. Still, it's a bit of an indictment that the guy who wields not only 6 floating lances, but this facial hair is only marginally more interesting than Guy with a Job named Dylan. But if you watched my video on my changed KH opinions, you might recall that I'm a bit higher on Xaldin now than I was when these games first came out. Not much of that raised approval rating can be attributed to Cage 2 though, where we see Xaldin torment the Beast, but don't really get much insight as to why. I'm not even sure what his best Cage 2 scene is, because for the most part he's either hooded or taking a bell bow to the gut. Even though it's not voiced, I think my pick is going to come from a Beast Castle mission in Days. The mission takes place on day 171, called Love, which is centered on the fight with the Infernal Engine on the bridge. After the battle, Xaldin appears and gives his opinion on Love. He's basically just an average post from the Nice Guys subreddit, but it at least fleshes out why he's so morbidly curious about the Beast in Cage 2. He has a specific fascination and disdain for Love, and probably views the Beast as something that's nobody adjacent, a being that should be incapable or undeserving of love. Yet this thing is, in his eyes, participating in an unnatural charade, so he's hell-bent on destroying it. I already made this joke before, but I think someone hurt Xaldin in a past life. Thankfully that someone is back and helping Dylan through his constipation in Cage 3.
When was the last time any one of us felt anything?
Ew, Vexen. Trying to find the best Vexen moment is like trying to pick a favorite memory from the 5th grade. I guess any day where I didn't cry after school? Even still, and despite Vexen's horribly sallow face, to quote the Chain of Memories novel, he at least has a more defined arc than someone like a Xaldin, even if the change Vexen undergoes feels a bit sudden. He's your typical research above all mad scientist in Calm and Days, and he shifts to the remorseful atoner in Cage 3. I suppose the question is, which half of the Vexen arc should we pull from? For the record, Vexen's most iconic scene is undoubtedly when he's set on fire by Axel. But I doubt Vexen would list that moment at the top of his resume. Like, regular Pat coming in last place in his first Cage 2 randomizer race because he failed to fully explore a world in a game that he constantly lambasts for being made of hallways, that's iconic, but it's not something I'm trying to share with tens of thousands of people. Ah, fuck. I should mention, I don't find either halves of Vexen's arc to be incredibly compelling, and again, that off-screen shift from science criminal to humanitarian is delivered very hastily. If we were going with a moment from the more devious half of his screen time, I'd probably land on his introduction scene in Chain of Memories. He says he's a scientist, he says experiments are what he does, he hypes up the replica project a bit, and everyone else on screen clearly thinks he's an insufferable prick. That's pretty much Vexen's whole deal. But ultimately, I guess I'm more invested in Cage 3 Vexen's moral transformation. I'd rather see a character grow and change than stay stagnant, so I'll go with his scene with Demyx in Radiant Garden. Aside from containing some fun banter, Vexen at least sheds some light on his moral epiphany. Evidently, he got into science to help people, but apparently there's something about being immolated by your coworker that really makes you question your life choices. Vexen is largely a shadow of more prominent and fleshed out characters who undergo a similar path to redemption. Vexen's path is just one that's extremely truncated, but I can appreciate it for what it is.
But now I can help someone with my research.
It's really tempting to cover 12 members of the organization plus Xion and completely ignore Lexaeus because holy fuck, what is there to even say? I get that when you plop a bunch of characters into a series all at the same time, one is bound to be the least developed, but 20 years out from this man's first appearance, I still know nothing about him. At least Xaldin got some development with Days, or Vexen with 3, but Lexaeus/Alias taking a vow of silence has not really done wonders for his character. What's his thing? That his personality matches his element? I sure wish any of his scenes rocked as much as his attacks do. I guess the nicest thing I can say about Lexaeus is that he's your typical strong, silent, earthy guy, but he's clearly not a dum-dum like many characters of a similar appearance or affiliation might be. But unlike all of the organization members we've covered so far, and the rest to come, I can't really think of any unique motivation Lexaeus has beyond doing his job. Like, yeah, Vexen was also a Xemnas bootlicker, but he also had the research angle and the atonement thing later on. Saïx has all sorts of hidden machinations, Xaldin has his crush on the beast. Lexaeus is just boys with Zexion and trying to get through the workday, which, respect, I guess. Initially, I thought the best Lexaeus scene would surely have to come from Recom, either before or after his fight with Riku. Watching them back though, I mean, it's not that I expected a ton, but there's not a lot there. He sorta just goads Riku into giving into darkness, which, like, real original, buddy. Honestly, and I can't believe I'm landing on this because it's kind of like a meme moment in a tutorial scene used to teach a gameplay mechanic, but I'm settling on the scene where Lexaeus smacks Roxas in Daze, because at least it's something. It's representative of how blunt and to the point Lexaeus is about things and how he's first and foremost focused on the mission at hand. The back of his hand, in this case. Roxas has questions and even burgeoning moral objections about the organization's mission, but Lexaeus shuts down all of that and keeps Roxas focused on what needs to be done. It paints a pretty clear picture of Lexaeus' personality. The picture is minimalist, but it's clear.
Don't mock me!
Rounding out the basement crew, we've got Zexion. When comparing nobodies and their completed counterparts, Zexion and Ienzo always felt the most distinct from each other, not counting special cases like Sora and Roxas or Terranor and Xemnus, of course. Unfortunately, Ienzo is a million times more boring than Zexion, and I don't feel super inclined to pick an Ienzo scene here. I appreciate his presence in Cage 3 and how he's like part of the C team for the protagonist now, but he doesn't have a ton to do beyond being tech support. His most substantial Cage 3 scene is probably his apology to Ansem the Wise, but I can't even feel great about that because personally I think the old fuck kinda had it coming. So that basically limits my options to Reverse Rebirth. Well, Zexion's attribute is Illusion, and his nickname in the organization is the Cloaked Schemer, so I think a moment that feels representative of those things would be ideal. Because beyond that, he's just a talkative goth Lexaeus with an English degree. Still, I always found him more engaging because he, like, has things to say, opinions on stuff. The bar is in Castle Oblivion's basement floor 13, but he's clearing it. But to best capture the general vibe of Zexion, I think I've got to go with his masquerading as Sora to Riku on the Destiny Islands floor. Granted, he doesn't actually appear as Zexion until Riku slices through him, but it's a good showcase of what Zexion is capable of in the way of manipulation and deception. Riku also tells him that he reeks, which is payback for Zexion smelling him earlier on in the campaign. This is one of the only times we ever see Zexion's composure break, the other time being when Axel hires the Riku replica to kill him. Being killed and being told I'm stinky are also two hot-button issues for me.
Many hearts were forever lost to the darkness because of what you did!
With all the apprentices dealt with, we move on to Saïx. Across his 3 major appearances, Saïx has a similar arc to Vexen, but with a lot more focus and personal stakes involved thanks to both his influence within the organization and his shaky friendship with Axel. Even though Saïx has always had some level of ulterior motives, he really sold his dedication to the organization cause, especially in Cage 2, and was something of a poster child for what a nobody even was. Unlike a lot of his comrades, Saïx very rarely showed anything that might be considered synonymous with emotion. Until he starts screaming at the moon during his boss fight, but I think he was just hungry at that particular moment. Above all that though, I've always viewed Saïx as Sora's true antagonist in Cage 2. That's still the first thing that comes to mind, how even though he's not the head of the organization, he feels like the face of it. I mean, his face literally has the X on it. Sora's interactions with Saïx in Twilight Town and Hollow Bastion changed the organization from an evil conglomerate that Yensid sent the party to dispatch into a truly contemptible and personally offensive force to Sora. Xemnus is the boss and he sets the agenda, but Saïx is the one out in the field twisting the knife. For the moment that best captures that, I'm picking the scene right after the Battle of 1,000 Heartless, where everyone and their mothers show up in the Dark Depths. Saïx completely breaks Sora's spirit here, between letting him know that freeing hearts only helps the organization and personally denying his pleas to see Kairi after he literally gets on his knees and begs. And yet, it's infuriating how impersonal it is, like HR firing you based on orders passed down from their boss's bosses. He doesn't really seem to take any pleasure in it like a Larxene would, he's just methodical and calculating and knows very well, as he says himself, how to injure a heart. Everything he does, including being extremely cruel in this moment, is all in service of the organization's greater goal, at least as far as Saïx knows. The promise of existence means any and everything is on the table. I could definitely see an argument for Saïx's Cage 3 death scene as the pick here, as he reveals the rationale behind his feelings or lack thereof in the prior games. But as much as I'm willing to give the Subject X stuff a fair chance, it still felt like it was coming out of nowhere here, and the whole scene is kind of anchored to that previously unknown motivation. A word that the game version of Saïx does understand, I assume.
In that case, The answer's no.
Axel is a complicated guy with a checkered past, and he's got a treasure trove of heavy-hitting moments. That being said, this was one of my easiest picks, and this time it does coincide with my favorite Axel scene and my favorite scene overall. It's memorized from Birth by Sleep. Yes, technically a Lee scene and bordering on a cameo appearance, but this scene lays the foundation for his actions and feelings as both Axel and Lee in the other games. Not only does this moment explain his catchphrase and or verbal tick, but it's a rare occasion where a character is like, yeah, so here's my philosophy on life. It also just does a great job at encapsulating a lot of Axel's core traits and relationships, obviously aided by being made with the hindsight of his first 3 appearances. But we get to see his friendship with Isa and their plot to infiltrate the castle, which will have ripple effects that last for a very long time. The scene is also a great showcase of Axel's cocky and competitive nature, and retroactively even plants seeds of why he takes such a quick liking to Roxas 10 years later. But again, most importantly, we get some insight on Axel's desire to live on in the memories of others, which is ultimately a grayer philosophy than he presents here. He no doubt has good intentions as Lee in this moment, but Axel's gonna do, to put it as lightly as possible, some super fucked up murdering, but it's memorable murdering all the same. I almost wish we somehow got to see this scene after Chain of Memories but before KH2 and Days, because it would have made for an even starker contrast between the conniving wildcard in Calm and the generally carefree, mischievous at most teenager in BBS. Even still, beneath the slightly arrogant and jokey persona, Lee is clearly shown to be an introspective and sensitive person in this scene. Like, he's pretty young to be caring about his legacy in this manner, and sure, maybe his friendships are just vessels for his idea of immortality, but hey, I never said altruism was a real thing. But he's here for Ven during one of his lowest moments, and he makes fast friends with him and puts a smile on his face. He'll always be there to bring his friends back, after all. And yeah, if you wanted a more dramatic Axel scene, or one where he's actually Axel, then that moment between him and Xion in Days is a contender for sure. You might also consider his self-sacrifice in KH2, as it's a great pick to illustrate how far he's willing to go for his friends. Granted, I think he and Sora could have handled a few more mook nobodies without Axel needing to explode himself, but he's a showman first and foremost, because a move like that is something you're sure not to forget.
See? I'm immortal.
And now, Demyx time. Do you ever wake up in a cold sweat realizing that in the year of our Volcanic and Blizzard Lord 2024, we have the least information on Demyx's life prior to the organization? We know more about what Dylan and Alias were up to. We see Luxord's Widow's Peak in the Remind ending. That is one hairline more than what we have on Demyx. Is that not terrifying? I don't have enough painkillers to brace my brain and body for what could possibly be coming down the pike in Demyx land. Is the best Demyx moment yet to come? Do I want that to be the case? Because I like Demyx, I think he's probably the KH character whose overall demeanor I most identify with, but I am more than satisfied with his role in the series. I don't really want or need him to be, you know. Let's just operate under the assumption that Demyx is just a comic relief character with a past that's no more or less extraordinary than any of the other organization members. That being said, I actually have no idea where to go for this one. Demyx has a ton of small, funny moments, but I'm not sure what his standout performance is. His most iconic scene is probably right before his fight in Hollow Bastion, where he flips the switch and shows he can get serious, which is really the only time that happens across his 3 games. It's the reason why he says almost never when talking about his ability to be extremely imposing in KH3. I get the sneaking suspicion that we'll get to see Demyx make good on that statement again in the future, probably to greater consequence than how it played out in KH2. But I don't think that Hollow Bastion scene really captures the more jocular side of Demyx. It's lighthearted, but not really funny. And even though Demyx is very much a side character in all of his appearances, he gets progressively more focus in each game he shows up in, from 2 to Days to 3. Part of me feels like that's setting up for something, and there's also this sort of meta factor coming into play with it. Demyx is established early on as a musician, a performer, and especially in Days and 3, it seems apparent that he yearns for stardom, or at the very least attention and recognition. By the time 3 rolls around, he's really gassing himself up and eager to get in the mix, taking a lot of umbrage with being a mere benched member for the true organization. All this to say, I think he's angling for a starring role, which brings me back to my apprehensiveness I expressed earlier. But to represent both his comedic qualities and his eagerness to be more important, I think I'm actually landing on his Remind scene with Riku, the one where he picks up the blank replica body and shows off his new iPhone. He's got fun banter, he overinflates his own importance, and he makes his second potential reference to an old web series. I also think it's like oddly character development in a way, because his whole thing in 2 and especially Days is that he's lazy and allergic to labor. But by KH3, he's so starved for the spotlight he's willing to run through dark corridors hauling around Forever 21 mannequins to get some respect and screen time. His desire to be perceived outweighs his disdain for perspiration. This pick isn't a super flashy moment, but check in with me after another game or two, and I feel like we might be revising this one.
Demyx time!
Anyway, back to that Widow's Peak. Up there with Xigbar, Luxord is a character I feel confident in having a lot more to come with an even smaller body of work in the rearview mirror. This feeling is entirely fueled by his KH3 appearance, especially when factoring in Remind. And how on earth is it actually Luxord, by the way, when his whole thing is gambling and you have luck right there in the name, and it's Titus Titus all over again. But Luxord is a character who went from feeling unintentionally underdeveloped to intentionally mysterious. He shows up to die in KH2, makes gambling puns in Days, and is actually making moves and having interesting conversations in KH3. I know a lot of people wanted KH3 to feel more climactic and conclusive, but I think after another major release, people will be more able to appreciate the character work and setup being done here. Hindsight will be 2020, the same year that Luxord's best moment happened. Yeah, I'm going back to Luxord. This one is pretty conclusively the conversation he has with Xigbar in Olympus at the start of Remind. Until then, we could have gleaned that Luxord is a smart, well-mannered guy with an above-average perception stat, but this almost never amounted to much beyond a slightly more pleasant demeanor than most of his co-workers when he does his dealings with Sora and Roxas. And we did see in Days that he has some degree of frustration about being out of the loop, if only the whispers at the top of the ladder carried to the bottom rung. And while words aren't quite being put into action yet during this Olympus conversation, this is the most inquisitive and suspicious we see Luxord get, and it's clear that he's got big plans for the future. The scene is called Strategic Moves for a reason. It's a war of words, a face-off between time and space, two characters who have way more up their sleeves than the company line. Which I would totally watch a remake of Face Off, but Nick Cage and John Travolta are Xigbar and Luxord. But this scene, plus Luxord's wildcard after his boss fight, and his moonlighting as Yazora's chauffeur, makes me really excited for where his character is headed. This Olympus scene really highlights his intellect as the only person to audibly clock Xigbar as being sketchy as fuck. Given his decorum with Sora and his somewhat antagonistic attitude toward Luxu/Xigbar, we might see Luxord as an ally in the future, but I kinda hope he stays an independent party.
I'm content to feign ignorance.
Speaking of organization members with hidden agendas, we've got the graceful assassin Marluxia. Marley is another character who I'm unsure of in terms of their trajectory. He was already the main antagonist of a game, but his newfound past as Laurium leads me to believe that the best may be yet to come from him. Marluxia gets to have some fun in KH3's
Fairy Tale Kingdom,
essentially helping to facilitate a parallel between Gothel with Rapunzel and himself with Naminé. But he's very much a cog in the Xehanortian machine in this game, so his best moment is going to come from Chain of Memories, where he's king of the castle. Admittedly, while I don't dislike Marluxia, he tends to fall through the cracks in my organization rankings because he shares a bit of personality territory with the likes of a Xaldin, Xemnus, or Saïx. They're all these strong, imposing, manipulative dudes who are lighter on the emotion than many of their co-workers. I suppose there's a little more grace and subtlety to Marluxia though, and he seems a bit more pleased with himself and his plans than those other guys. I think the best snapshot of that is probably the scene where he first unhoods his beautiful head of hair. Not just for that, but I won't say that it doesn't help. He doesn't say a ton here, but it's fun to watch Vexen pull rank on him and for Marley to just shut him down and manipulate him into fighting Sora. Because that's really the key element to Marluxia so far, it's his cunning and treachery. Once he's done sending Vexen off to get pummeled, he walks over to Naminé and manipulates her too, and still finds the time to teach me the word denouement before my English classes had the chance. I think a second pick here would be his usage of Naminé as a human shield against Axel, though we see even less of Marluxia's personality in that scene. But it helps to illustrate the main point here, which is that Marley will gladly dig his claws into whomever necessary to help achieve his goal of taking over the organization, which I'm not sure why he and Larxene wanted to do that, unless it was just power for power's sake. So I'm hopeful that the Laurium of it all will provide his time as Marluxia with a bit more reasoning and motivation.
That would be an unfortunate denouement.
And let's move on to Marluxia's co-conspirator, Larxene. What I really appreciate about Larxene is that she has a thing. Almost everyone in the organization is a villain, but Larxene revels in this. She isn't just rude or mean, she's a full-on sadist. She's even seen reading something from the Marquis de Sade in the manga. So between having a very established brand and being the only woman in the initial organization, you're not going to be getting that sort of personality slush like I just mentioned with Marluxia. And like her fellow traitor, Larxene is let loose to harass a new heart in KH3, and that's nice and all, but her best game is still Chain of Memories. And again, I anticipate the Elrena stuff from Union Cross will factor into Larxene's character moving forward, especially judging from her and Marley's KH3 death scenes, but for now her body of work is mostly concerned with inflicting as much physical and emotional pain as possible. I can think of no better depiction of this than her first meeting with Sora, a cutscene aptly titled Larxene the Ruthless. She's just having so much fun, pretty transparently manipulating Sora in a sing-songy voice, and when he least suspects it, just running up and kicking him in the chest. She just does not give a fuck. Almost everybody else in the series tends to fight fair and raise a weapon or announce their intentions, but Larxene just goes right for the sucker kick. When considering the idea of nobodies being unable to feel, I don't think any member in COM is more contradictory to that notion than Larxene. She takes so much obvious glee in fucking with people, not just in this scene, but several others. This moment is also pretty big for its plot implications, as this is where things are really kicked into high gear as far as Naminé messing with Sora's memory is concerned, and Larxene is the catalyst for that. My second pick for the best Larxene moment would be prior to her second boss fight, where she basically lays out the entire plot to Sora, slaps Naminé across the room, and discloses how she tingles at the thought of how easily Sora is manipulated. Her words, not mine. It's really close between these two moments. I just prefer watching Larxene set up the pieces over watching her knock them all down. But she's having a blast in both instances, and they're both quintessential Larxene.
I'm a bad guy, so you have to go through me.
Alright, back in definitively main character territory now, let's talk about Roxas. I have to say, he's up there as one of my favorite characters, but I'm hard-pressed to come up with a ton of material for his highlight reel. Roxas has always been more of a slow burn character for me, as opposed to someone with big, standout moments. There are exceptions to that, obviously, and we'll land on one, but I think I more so enjoy Roxas for the quieter moments and the gradual build-up of angst. If we're thinking up big Roxas scenes, one of the flashiest and most anticipated is his return in KH3. It's cathartic and chill-inducing, but I don't know how much it's really saying about Roxas as a character. If anything, I find his dialogue here a bit uncharacteristic of him, like, I owe my return to many coming from Roxas never felt right to me. It's still a great emotional scene, but I think we need to dig through the trauma buffet that was KH2 and Days for our Roxas moment. I know I've mentioned this in past videos, but Roxas is the first character in the series to be given an objectively tragic storyline, and that's still what most immediately comes to mind when I think of him. Obviously, things are going better for him now. Roxas is a rare case of someone who had a better 2019 than 2006. But back in the day, it seemed like for a long while that Roxas got the short end of the Beast Castle stick. I wasted that joke in a video that had nothing to do with Roxas, so I'm reclaiming it here like Roxas with the sigil. So when looking for the best Roxas moment, I'm looking for something that is most emblematic of his personal tragedy, and I struggle to land on something that's not my summer vacation is over. And for the record, this is a very short scene. It's a little over a minute long, and like 20 seconds of it is taken up by the KH2 logo. And Roxas only has 3 lines, one of them dedicated to declaring his hatred for Diz, which, fair. But it's more about what this moment represents for Roxas' journey. It's the gray bow on top of a very sad-looking present. Roxas is the Charlie Brown of Kingdom Hearts. Every time it looks like he might kick that football, Xemnus or Saïx or Ansem the Racist is there to pull it away at the last second. No beach vacation, no sharing the winter stick, no running far, far away with your friends away from your shitty job. Get in the egg, Roxas. Again, things would brighten up eventually, but for now, the universe of Kingdom Hearts was making an example out of Roxas. AKA, if you're an original playable character, you had better be Sora, otherwise please enjoy being victimized and or forgotten. But when faced with impossible odds like the notion of freeing Kingdom Hearts or being trapped in an old geezer simulation, Roxas always goes down swinging. He never goes quietly, but to watch that fury melt into resignation here is just soul-crushing in the best way.
Looks like my summer vacation is over.
There's soul-crushing, and then there's pulverizing a soul until it's itty-bitty pieces, throwing those pieces into a black hole, wiping the memory of all those who ever loved you, and then those people eventually dying anyway. Welcome to the Xion experience. It's no surprise that the Xion pick has to come from Days, since her other offerings thus far are quite limited. Sorry to keep the bummermobile running here, but it's hard for me to not immediately consider her death scene on day 357. You've got her big scream after the Riku fight at Beast Castle, or a handful of ice cream conversations, but I think for most of us, when we hear Xion, our minds jump to her dying beneath the Twilight Town clock tower. I know Sora has put his life on the line several times, but I can't imagine a braver and more noble sacrifice than Xion's here. It's not just casting away your life for the sake of someone you love, it's allowing yourself to be struck down by one of 2 people who give a shit about you for the sake of someone you've never met. And you're not a Heartless who can be restored, you're not even just gone forever, but no one will remember you ever existed. That's like the one thing someone can have in death is a legacy. It's what Axel has been talking about this whole time. But no, do not get it memorized, do not go directly to the final world, do not collect 5,000 money. And it's not like Xion lived a long and fulfilling life that led up to this moment. She's 350 days old, spent a chunk of those days in a coma, and was otherwise treated like a useful tool at best or a defective mistake at worst. A name that means imaginary, an identity that's not fully her own, and two friends who have been forced into attacking her at various points. That's your Xion starter kit. It'll pair nicely with your Xion ender kit, which you can enjoy if you're able to see it through the tiers. Unlike a lot of characters we've discussed, I'm totally fine if Xion doesn't have any more big moments because she truly put in her time already. I'll take an occasional post on Kingstagram to let us know that she's safely collecting seashells across the different beaches of the worlds. Whether or not you enjoy Xion as a character, there is just no moment of sacrifice in the series more gutting and selfless than hers.
Never forget. That's the truth.
You know who else sacrificed herself to help Sora? Why, Maleficent, of course. Yeah, really. I mean, that's not her best moment, but, you know, segues. Like how Sora and many protagonists get stronger as a series goes on, Maleficent seems to undergo an inverse effect. She partakes in a transformation from terrifying and imposing figure to ill-mannered toddler. At this point, Maleficent is the I coulda gone pro beer gut personified. And yet, she was the first character presented to us as a major villain, and she actually did have some clout at some point. So that leaves me outside Castle Oblivion at the crossroads. Do I go for a moment that would best reflect Maleficent in her own mind, or something that accurately depicts what she is, which is a nuisance to the true game players? Because for the latter, you can't get much more washed up than hatching a plot to turn Santa Claus into Santa Heartless or sniffing around the Thieves' Gardens for the black box. For something more impactful, literally, you might look at Riku Ansem stabbing her and later on rubbing her dragon guts into the floor like she's some random schmutz he got stuck on his shoe when going for a walk. But I prefer to try and see the best in people, over-the-hill evil fairies included, so let's try to aim for a moment prior to her becoming the belligerent drunk dance mom of Kingdom Hearts. If you want Maleficent at the height of her powers, you have to go back as far as you can, because screen time is the rope with which Maleficent unalives herself. Not counting Final Mix, where you briefly see her hand at Rising Falls, I'd have to go with her first scene, which is the first appearance of the Disney Villain Council. Maleficent's at her strongest when she has multiple gullible minions to boss around instead of just the one she's been stuck with for the past 19 years. Sure, she's only got one line, but that's all she needs right here. Everyone's bickering and she hits them with the
Bartello enough!
And they all shut the fuck up. She commands respect. I wasn't really familiar with Maleficent when I first played KH1, I was just vaguely aware that she was the bad lady from Sleeping Beauty, but what I knew for certain after this scene was that I was afraid of her. But you know who I was always more afraid of? That guy who I couldn't fully see in the secret place. Live it up while you can, Maleficent.
Enough!
The video isn't long enough, so I might as well talk about Maleficent's aforementioned most loyal, most gullible minion, good old Pete. And Pete is about as deep as these Land of Departure puddles. He's no Atlantica. What is Pete's role in the series? I would say to be the butt of not only jokes, but all other types of statements and/or questions. Pete is a punchline whom people are lining up to punch. Maleficent lets him play Kingdom Hearts with her, but he's plugged into the second controller port. He exists to be verbally pooed upon, and I'm not talking Winnie the. But let's not get it twisted, Pete is the main character of KH2. He's everywhere you'd least and most suspect. You know that episode where SpongeBob and regular Patrick adopt a clam and SpongeBob keeps showing all the different places that the clam's shitty diapers are stored? You could do the same thing with KH2. Pete is in every nook and cranny of this game, boasting a similar smell and general vibe to boot. His initial appearance is a strong contender. He's plotting to send some Heartless into Yensid's tower to make his boss happy, and SDG show up and not only tell him that they killed his boss, but they laugh at him. Pete sends a pathetic squad of shadows after them, which they promptly dispatch, and then they proceed to ignore him and run into the tower, leaving him standing there looking like a fucking idiot. It's a pretty prescient picture of the Pete playbook. But what I think we really need for the quintessential Pete scene is not just verbal mockery, but physical assault. So we're actually going to Agrabah when Genie returns from his sabbatical, apparently having lost his eyesight, whereupon he abuses Pete. It's hurtful enough to be knocked around and weight-shamed, but it's even worse to be mistaken for Aladdin, my least favorite fictional orphan. And also, honestly, throw in real orphans too. I know some really great orphans. Pete does have more consequential moments, like charging off into the Heartless mob at the World It Never Was, but I'm not going to extend the same courtesy to Pete like I did for Maleficent. Maleficent was at least the queen at one point, but Pete has always been the jester.
I'll teach you to make a fool out of me!
Let's just squeeze in one last Disney character here, because when else will I get to talk about Yensid? I guess it's more so have to talk about Yensid, because I'll never really forgive him for when he induced a coma on me at the beginning of KH2. Did you know that the Yensid lore dump scene is the 4th longest scene in KH2 when you don't include the credits and the opening? That man knows how to yap. But he also knows how to pick his moment, and he sure did that in KH3 when he dropped a fat Fantasia and or the Bible reference on everybody by parting the Red Sea on the Heartless Horde. KH2 and BBS like to talk about Yen Sid like he's a retired sports legend, and I was just sort of sitting there like, sorry, I wasn't around in the 40s when people played fruitball with globs of mercury. He was all bark for quite a while, so it was beyond satisfying to see him finally get off his ass and bite some Heartless. And I mean, it raises questions as to why he never felt the need to teleport anywhere in the universe at any other point in the series, but maybe it just takes a really long time for his MP bar to recharge.
I will hold them all here for as long as I can.
From one old fart to another, I guess we should spend at least a little time on the lesser Ansem, Ansem the Wise. I'd say the central idea of Ansem the Wise is that revenge equals bad, which he eventually learns, somehow without trudging through The Last of Us Part 2. And his desire for revenge against his apprentices truly did turn him into an actual racist, and I know it kinda sounds like I'm joking when I say that, but the man really was deeply prejudiced. The guys who booted him from his castle went on to become nobodies, and Ansem, being the scholarly genius he is, went on to surmise that all nobodies must be bad.
I know Naminé helped us a lot, but would you mind killing her when she's done being useful? I was once in charge of a planet.
Of course, when he was in charge of the planet, he was doing experiments on imprisoned children. Just because she's a PNG from the mobile game doesn't mean she has no rights. Needless to say, Ansem has a lot to be remorseful about, and to his credit, he's at least spent all of his screen time on expressing that remorse ever since blowing himself up at the end of KH2. Which is a fine pick for best Ansem the Wise scene, but I think the aftermath where he reflects on his actions at the Dark Margin gives a fuller picture of how much he's fucked up, aka his chat with Aqua during the secret ending of Birth by Sleep, blank points. This is another scene I've talked about before because how do you not? How do you rest your head on your pillow at night without thinking about blank points? The whole scene is beautiful, and Ansem and Aqua's conversation is the crux of it. Ansem fully admits to his mistakes and flat out says he ruined a bunch of teenagers' lives, but he also plants some seeds of hope for the future. As flawed as he was, he at least took the initiative to basically program a tragedy failsafe into the series, as the data he hid in Sora, the same stuff I mentioned during the Riku scene, is the key to everyone's happy ending. There's no sand Donalds or foot races or frisbee throwing or shell collecting without this Ansem data. So, as much of a fuck-up as Ansem the Wise was, this scene also showcases his propensity to be a force of good, to show why he deserved to be the ruler of Radiant Garden. Within the grander KH series, I sort of consider KH2, Days, and BBS to be the tragedy trilogy. 2 is the plight of Roxas and Naminé, Days is the plight of Xion, and Roxas again to be honest, and BBS is the plight of TVA. Blank points marks the turning point. 6 characters get a raw deal, but at least after all of that, Grandpa Ansem is here to give us a glimmer of hope, ironically from within the deepest darkness. The road ahead will be difficult, we still have to get through Recoded and Dream Drop, but there is in fact a light at the end of the tunnel.
So many are still waiting for their new beginning, their birth by sleep.
Should we just go through the rest of the old guys? If we're talking about old guys whose hobbies include ruining hella lives, look no further than the Master of Misfortune, the Viscount of Veins, the Warden of Werther's Originals, Xehanort. And already, let's just sweep young Xehanort out of contention here. I know for damn sure that the best moment isn't coming from this twerp. I mean, where to begin with Xehanort? He's got one of the longest resumes in the series, and probably a backup resume in case something happens to the first. Not unlike his various offspring, Xehanort's primary motivation is accessing Kingdom Hearts and getting the biggest brain ever, furthermore granting him the ability to remake the world as he sees fit. There are no boundaries as far as Xehanort is concerned. The world is rotten, so any and everything must be done in order to give Xehanort the reins and let him course correct to a less corrupt universe. And that's ultimately what Xehanort is all about, even more so than his fellow antagonists/selves, which is control. Ansem and Xemnus have done their fair share of bodyjacking and manipulating, but Xehanort wrote the textbook. He's got a finger in every pie. A weird, fidgety little finger. The amount of control that Xehanort exerts over the plot is suffocating. A plan for every eventuality, every character a pawn in his grand game of Alba and Ader. So the best Xehanort moment has gotta be when that control is physically and ideologically wrested from him, and that's during his final defeat in KH3. I know people take issue with how it may feel as if Xehanort gets off easy, which is something I initially felt as well, and it's also something I talked about in my top 10 scenes video. My pick here is less about that part and more so focused on Sora confronting Xehanort and basically telling him that his philosophy is a crock of shit.
A real leader knows that destiny is beyond his control, and accepts that.
And this is the first thing to coax a scrap of emotion out of Xehanort, or at least an emotion that isn't giddiness over how much of a bastard he can be.
You remind me of a friend that I murdered one time.
To see Xehanort's faulty worldview be declaratively rejected, as well as this happening after a certified ass-whooping, is immensely satisfying. Xehanort couldn't do what he wanted by himself. He needed to use so many people as stepping stones to achieve his goals. His strength ultimately came from other people. Sora is the other side of that coin, someone who derives strength from others but through bonds of friendship instead of exertion of power and control. And he's the one to finally talk some sense into Xehanort. Let the record show, I still fully believe Xehanort deserved the ass-whooping, and he probably wouldn't have listened otherwise, but lesson learned, it's good to talk about your feelings.
It can give us a new start.
Naturally, I want to quickly talk about the best moment for Eraqus, which unsurprisingly comes from this same scene. Because it's obviously not coming from Dark Road, and he's hardly even in BBS. And when he is, he's proctoring an exam or trying to murder his stepson. Not the best highlight reel. But when he comes back as a Force Ghost or whatever to dunk on Xehanort and apologize to his kids, that's an easy pick for the top of his list. And I don't have a ton to say about Eraqus, really. He's kind of like Ansem Light, just sub out hatred for nobodies with hatred for darkness. Both really bad babysitters, both killed but came back again to admit that they were being dum-dums. The line that always stuck with me here was Eraqus pointing out that just because it's too late for him and Xehanort, that doesn't mean that the next generation can't set things right. Just because you ruin the planet with your bad ideas doesn't mean you have to drag down the rest of us with you. And true to typical Eraqus fashion, he gives out one more quest for one of his pupils. He anoints Terra the man of the house and asks that he look after Aqua and Ven, which is bonkers because, and I say this as a Terra fan, that should absolutely 100% be Aqua's job by this point. Alternatively, if we want to pick a scene of Eraqus being a silly little guy, we can go with him walking like a carpet in Dark Road Agrabah.
Enough. Checkmate.
Okay, well that should cover all of the octogenarians, which leaves us with 2 young people and 2 primordial entities. So let's talk about the Edgelord. Vanitas isn't the most developed panel on the command board. To be honest, I don't even really fully understand what he wants. Like, in Birth by Sleep, he wants to forge the Keyblade, but why? Does he think that'll make him feel good? It's just what Xehanort wants, so it's not even like a super self-serving goal from Vanitas' perspective. I mean, I guess he's one of the original Darknesses, so he probably just has an innate desire for chaos. But despite his sort of otherworldly, inhuman origins, I always found Vanitas had an underlying sadness to him, and things always felt so much more personal between him and other characters. It probably has something to do with him being the same physical age and height as the protagonist, like he's a kid who went to the same school but has a really shitty home life. And it's one thing for an Ansem or Xemnus to be obsessed with darkness or power, but it feels more unnerving when coming from Vanitas, who's like that but as a 15-year-old. And there are characters more evil than Vanitas, but none of them are meaner than him, and he knows it. He's an Always Sunny character stuck living on Sesame Street. He knows he doesn't fit in, even with some of his fellow villains meeting their demise at the end of KH3, and that's the spot I'm picking for Vanitas. There's no reasoning with Vanitas, no rehabilitation, or even really a respectful nod like what happens with almost every other real organization member. Sora and Ven sit down in their chairs backwards and try to give him the ABC Family sitcom talk, but Vanitas flips them off and says this is not just a phase, which also serves as a little reference to his actual literal status as a darkness from Union Cross times, and then he dies. There's something refreshing about that. Vanitas isn't going to be tricked or convinced into being a good guy, he's not buying the propaganda. There's a reason the phrase is gaslight, not gas darkness. Ven and Sora operate under the assumption that something must have forced him to be this way, but Vanitas sets the record straight. He is Vanitas, a hedgehog created by Master Xehanort to forge the Keyblade. This is who he is. It'll be a shame when he inevitably reappears in KH4 or some other game and they manage to exorcise the true darkness from him and Vanitas ends up being a good guy, but for now it's a unique lesson in Kingdom Hearts. You can't save everybody.
What I am is darkness.
As for his brother, have I ever made it apparent on the main channel that I'm not really a big Ven guy? I think his campaign in BBS is overall my least favorite, and I also just struggle to figure out what exactly his thing is that sets him apart from anyone else. If Ven walks into the reality TV casting call, there is no way he gets on the show. He has no easily imagined Chiron, no identifiable trait. Small bean does not count as a trait, or if it does, I'm not the biggest fan of it. I think the premise of Ven's existence sort of necessitates that he is extremely similar to both Sora and sometimes Roxas, and I get that, but I've never been super invested in what he's up to as an individual. I think Ven's backstory and path through the series are the more interesting things about him, less so his actual personality or anything he says or does. I'm sure I'm missing some nuance to him, but he, funnily enough, puts me to sleep before I ever have a chance to discern that nuance. I guess there's a kernel of intrigue to him in the later hours of BBS. He has to come to terms with the prospect of fighting Vanitas, and like anyone tied to Sora, is willing to sacrifice himself to protect others. In this case, that looks like...
Just put an end to me.
I thought about making this my Ven pick, it was the first thing that came to mind, but I don't know, it's just feeling a bit repetitive now to pick the self-sacrifice moment. But outside of that scene, I fear that I just don't really get this character, and you know things are becoming dire when you start rooting around through Union Cross scenes. He's got a bit more going on there, what with the whole being used as a murder conduit thing. I think Union Cross also gives me the closest thing I'm gonna get to a defining Ven quality or trait, and that's his status as a quote-unquote pure light. I anticipate that this will have broader implications later on in the series, so for now I guess I'm going with that, when he reveals that information and fights the darkness inside the Foreteller's chamber. Ven being a pure light would at least do a bit of legwork in explaining his sort of innate innocence. If he's the closest thing we have to a walking, talking embodiment of the concept of light, then I guess that's pretty cool. Did not expect to make a UX pick going into this, but these scripts take me to crazy places.
Call me Vin! 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 Ven.
Alright, so now let's talk about
Terra!
Yes, thank you, Ven. Maybe that's Ven's defining characteristic, being the biggest Terra stan in the series. Because how can you not be? Look at that party in the front, party in the back hairdo.
Right.
The form and function fashion sense.
There we
the
go.
dedication to ranked professional sticker booking. What's not to love?
Easy.
I've long served as a conductor on the Terra apologist train, and that isn't changing anytime soon. I won't pretend he's any deeper or more well-defined than Ven, because Terra is definitely encroaching on Riku territory from time to time, but I'm just having a lot more fun when Terra is on screen as opposed to Ven. Terra is just a character that I turn my brain off for in exchange for becoming an unabashed hype beast. Hype is interwoven with this character's DNA, it runs deep in his veins. He has no blood type, only blood hype. Because the first peek we got of this man was as the armored badass in the KH2 secret ending, and not long after as the thumb-breaking boss fight that is the Lingering Will. The man too angry to die, the guy who is so committed to his friends that he will just illogically persist through several insane means, because he made a promise to set things right. So the choice here was always between making the promise or making good on the promise. And I need that emotional catharsis, baby. I'm snorting that KH3 scene like it's the cure to acid reflux, even though it will almost certainly exacerbate it. It's just so good. Terra Xehanort's like, oh my god, no fair, how did you even do that? You're not supposed to. And the Cum Guardian is like, shut the fuck up, idiot, grab your face. Rips the bandages off, teaches himself how to speak fucking Rosetta Stone shit. His mouth must be so dry. 10 plus years as this little deep-fried dark side slave thing. Jesus Christ. Terra's theme needs to be either my wedding song or what they play when they put me in the ground, or both. And this line?
You never stop lighting my way back.
That just throws me over the edge. Terra did make a lot of mistakes. He was manipulated by the best in the biz, but his friends never gave up on him. I get chills every time I watch this. I know this scene is reading as more so my favorite Terra scene, but this is a case where I think best and favorite overlap in the Venn diagram, not the Ventus diagram.
You found me, just like you promised.
Of the Wayfinder trio, I think Aqua is the most fleshed out, and I would credit that to her getting an entire game to herself. Well, entire in quotes. Obviously 0.2 isn't your typical runtime, but it's still more than what Terra or Ven have. She's also the character I'm most interested to see more of as we head into the next phase of the series. Because as tragically as many of these characters we've discussed met their ends, Aqua didn't have what one might call the good fortune to die. She just sorta had to live in hell for 11 years. So I think the key Aqua trait might be perseverance, because I know that I definitely roll up into the fetal position after maybe 11 minutes. Aqua is probably the most clear-cut example of a character in the series who has been profoundly scarred by the trauma she's endured, most obviously indicated by her freezing up at the sight of the Demon Tide. To her, it manifests as a big tornado of her own depression and self-doubt, and I'm beyond curious to see if KH4 or any future games will explore that thread any further. I'd think it might take a bit more than a few hugs and a hot cocoa to feel better after escaping from a place called the Realm of Darkness. Aqua's role in the series up until this point has been something of the Great Protector, and until we have the chance to see more from her in the future, I think that's what I want to highlight when selecting the best Aqua scene. She can come off a bit hall monitor adjacent at times, but for the most part, she's a well-meaning pseudo-authority figure with a good head on her shoulders, and she's always just trying to keep people safe. You see that when she fights Vanitas in KH3, or when she casts the protective spell on Kairi's necklace in Birth by Sleep, among several other occasions, of course. But I think the pinnacle of Aqua's role as the Protector is her short monologue at the end of 0.2. Even though she is undoubtedly suffering from all of the baggage that comes with being separated from everyone you know and love thanks to being in hell, Aqua still perseveres and chooses to be the light that cuts through all the shadows. She's taking it upon herself to be the welcome committee for anyone else who arrives on these shores. It's a promise, as she says, but it's also a threat because she will mow down anyone or anything else that tries to fuck with her. Her first scene in BBS had her passing out the Wayfinders she had made, but now she herself has become the Wayfinder. And she lived up to her promise. She was there to protect Ansem the Wise when SOD showed up in KH3. Of course, she ended up getting dunked into the Swamps of Sadness again, but she put in a good effort given that she had no Keyblade. I assume she spent a few years training herself in like ninja moves because she gets some really good kicks in. All goes to show that she's fully prepared to protect people by whatever means necessary. But as Eraqus said, she was left with such a heavy burden, and I really hope we get to see her unpack everything she's been through when she's next on our screens.
I am Master Aqua, and that's a promise.
And there you have it. My apologies to Hainer, Pence, and Olette, we ran out of time. Once again, let me know your thoughts and leave detailed paragraphs on how wrong I was. If you're new, or if you keep stumbling onto my stuff and your recommendations, consider subscribing. I'm getting close to 50k, and that would make my brain happy, and my parents proud, maybe. Of course, if you really enjoy it, I once again humbly direct you to my Patreon if you'd like to support the channel, and you can find any and all of my other stuff at regularpad.com. Twitter, Discord, Twitch, hell, if you want to know what games I own, my backlog is even there. Thanks so much for watching. I had a ton of fun putting this one together. Till next time, stay safe out there.